Go.
Welcome to the PRCA's podcast, Fuse, the global podcast for PR, marketing and communication professionals. Our special guest today is Ishtar Schneider. Welcome, Ishtar.
Thanks, Farzana. Lovely to be here.
Now, Ishtar, I'm going to just share with our listeners a little bit about who you are and the incredible career journey that you've been on. Ishtar is the chair of the PRCA's Equity, Inclusion and Advisory Board, Women PR Committee member, co-running the organization's flagship mentoring program with PRWeek. And in her day-to-day, she leads global people inclusion diversity communications for Mars Petcare, a business with over 100,000 passionate associates in more than 130 countries worldwide. Before joining Mars, she spent 5+ years at Edelman in London as part of the health practice senior leadership team. There, she led the strategic direction for global public health and pet health clients, including Johnson & Johnson, Roche, Mars Petcare, and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. She also drove the agency's UK gender equity and inclusion efforts and built the UK's health marketing team. With a background in healthcare comms, Ishtar has a track record of building and executing globally integrated comms programs that are data-driven, human-centric, and achieve tangible business impact. Ishtar is a proud Taiwanese American with experience working across the US, UK, and Australia. Previously sat on the State Council for Public Relations Institute of Australia and led the PRCA's health group for 4 years, helping to drive professional development programs for comms practitioners around the globe. My God, Ishtar. Really, really fascinating background and just truly, truly global. So I wanted to start off with just getting to know a little bit about you, about what a typical day in Ishtar's life looks like.
Sure. And thank you for that intro. It's certainly a mouthful. Um, yeah, I think, it's that classic question, and everyone always says there's no typical day in comms, which I do think is really true. But I do, for me, it really tends to start with something active if I can help it. So whether that's yoga or Pilates or a bit of tennis if I'm lucky with the weather. And, trying to get a bit of fresh air and some sun. And then I think it's about keeping an eye on what's been happening. So I know we're going to chat about kind of media and where I get my news, but for me, I do a bit of a scan of, the Telegraph, CNN, BBC, a couple of the WhatsApp groups that I'm a part of that, have a lot of different PR professionals, from across the different sectors and industries, which helps kind of keep a finger on the pulse. And then really the day could take any any number of directions from there. So, I look after what we call people and organizational communications, or, traditionally the HR function within the business, but from a corporate affairs perspective. And what that really means is anything that is one of our big kind of people priority areas. So that might be related to culture, talent and leadership, or capability building. And so that really could be anything from helping support our leaders to show up well, on any of these things internally or externally, working on big events related to our big people priorities, or just, helping us show up well as a great place to work, and on our kind of diversity and inclusion kind of priority areas. So, it's a wide range, and every day is different, but it could be anything related to that. And if I don't manage to get something active in the morning, then I definitely try and squeeze it in the afternoon.
You mentioned something really interesting about in terms of consuming news and, the sort of traditional looking at digital media in terms of, Telegraph or, what other media outlets. But you also mentioned WhatsApp groups, which is really interesting because I'm on a few PR WhatsApp groups like David Gallagher's WhatsApp group.
Yep.
And it's really interesting because I've increasingly started relying upon these WhatsApp groups because they talk about what's happening in the news, but with the added bonus of having sort of PR practitioners around the world with their lens on it. So it's really interesting how actually WhatsApp groups have started encroaching in those, different sort of platforms that we use to keep ourselves in the loop, which is fascinating. Now, your work is very purpose driven, and I just wanted to ask you, do you have like a conscious purpose that really determines how you work, the type of organizations you've worked with, the type of work that you do? Do you have like a central sort of focus in the way that you choose to curate your career in terms of being mission orientated?
Yeah, I would say that it has been both conscious and unconscious. So I think it probably started a bit unconsciously. And then as I've progressed, it's been much more conscious. I recently did a program with Harvard and Mars called Women Leading Purposefully. And part of that program was around kind of distilling down what your personal leadership purpose is. And I think it was a really useful exercise. And they give you some frameworks on how to think about it and how to, kind of iterate on it. And it's never something I think that is set in stone necessarily, but it becomes your, kind of your personal North Stars. You're thinking about your career, where you want to go, and also what are the things that really truly bring you joy in your work, but also in your kind of 360 personal life as well. And that was really, I found that really helpful. And so, mine's very much still a work in progress. But as I was thinking about, the experiences in the career that I've had to date, for me, it's really been about inspiring change makers to own and articulate and amplify their unique story and impact on the world. So, I've seen that as kind of a red thread through both my traditional 9 to 5, but also in my extracurricular activities. So things like personal styling, which I used to do for a few years, it's all part of that, helping people show up as their best selves and feel their best, but also, be able to do that in a way that has a real impact on the world.
The other thing I wanted to ask is obviously your career gives you immense joy, and you have chosen, very well in terms of your life path. You've done very well, and often I think people who succeed in their career is often because they are just well suited to it, and most people who come into our industry, a lot of them sort of stumble into the world, not sort of knowing about the industry before. And I wanted to ask you that, you obviously grew up in New Mexico in the US, and you started off interning at your aunt's PR firm. And that's what sort of like kickstarted your love of PR. My question is, if you hadn't had the sort of, opportunity of having an aunt who happened to have a PR firm that you had, do you think you would have discovered PR yourself, or do you think it really was that sliding doors moment that then opened up this world for you?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I would have found my way into PR. I think it probably would have happened later, maybe less quickly. Yeah, my aunt was in PR and advertising, and much kind of more on the blended advertising side at the time, and worked on McDonald's and kind of different clients like that for a long time on the kind of west coast of the U.S. And I just loved her. You have that one family member that you just idolize, and she was mine. And so, when I was 14, 15, I begged to be able to kind of come in over the summer and find out what it was like. And so I was laminating coverage in, coverage binders for clients, and, putting together kind of briefing packs for their teams and stuff like that. So, very, very junior stuff at the time, but I just loved it. And I've always loved writing. I've always loved reading. And so I think a career in comms felt natural to me. But yeah, I think most people don't really know what PR means going in, coming out of high school, going into university. And so I think I was lucky in that respect, that I had someone who I really looked up to that was already in that area. And while I wasn't really interested in the advertising side, the PR stuff really, kind of caught my fancy.
And in education wise, you did your undergrad at University of San Francisco in comms, and then Georgetown political journalism. And then you had the opportunity to study and work in Sydney. What I wanted to ask you is, you studied political journalism, but yet you did a lot of your sort of career focused on health. So I wanted to sort of understand, what was it about political journalism that you studied and understood really well, but then decided to segue into another area in comms?
Yeah, well, I think when I was in university, there was very much an expectation that you would do a lot of unpaid internships. You needed a lot of experience to be able to kind of get that first job out of university. And so, I think that's changed a little bit now, but at that time, I was really hungry to just kind of get my hands into as many different opportunities as possible. And so, while I was in university, I did kind of a range of different things. I tried radio, I did kind of advertising marketing, kind of a minor. I did PR. I did, kind of a bit of psychology and comms, right, in some of the classes that I took. And then there was an opportunity to do a summer at Georgetown, which was, kind of a political journalism course. And I thought, I haven't tried that. Let me see if I'm going to do it anywhere. Washington D.C. is the place to do it. So I applied and I got in, which was fantastic. And I ended up really not wanting to go down that route. So I think it was important for me to be able to try them to see what facets of PR and comms really appealed to me. And really, I kept coming back to traditional, kind of comms and PR rather than, any of those other kind of offshoots. So that really helped me get a bit of clarity, I guess, on that. So yeah, for me, it was about getting the breadth of experience and seeing what stuck out to me.
And when I look at your career, I think, my God, you've really worked and studied in so many different cultures, and you had a 6-year stint in Australia at Paling Communications, healthcare and well-being focused. And I just wanted to ask, from your time in Australia and having also lived in London and educated in the US, was there anything that was quite sort of unique about working in Australia in the comms industry? Any sort of insight, because I've always come across the most incredible political comms, sort of talent from Australia. And I've always wondered, what is it about Australia that actually they produce really world-class talent?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of my cousins, so my mom's originally from Taiwan actually, and so I kind of grew up with that, I guess, that global mentality and that global curiosity because I had a passport from when I was, I wouldn't say like 3 months old. So I had been doing that kind of transatlantic trip for a while. And I had cousins who had grown up in Sydney, and so that was the appeal of going. I'd been once to visit them and really loved it, as you can imagine. And then I did my study abroad, my final year of university in Australia as well, and it was half work, interning in with Edelman at that time, and half study. And I just loved it, and I think you're with that market. It's very specific, right? You're looking at a very, a market that's far away from a lot of things, but still English speaking, quite developed in some ways, especially in the healthcare sector, right? They get a lot of medicines, kind of quite early on in the piece, but it's also really unique in the health space that it's highly regulated, right? So the UK and Australia are some of the most regulated markets in the world, and I think because of that, in the industry that I was in when I decided to move back, I loved that forces you to be extra creative because you are so tightly, controlled in what you are able to say, when you're able to say it. And I loved that forces you to think outside the box. And so I think you see that in the work that comes out of the market. I also think, to your question about differences, the media landscape is very different. So you look at how many TV stations there are in San Francisco alone, it's double digits. And you look at in Australia, there's 3, sometimes 4 stations that cover the entire country, right? So, and there's only 2 national newspapers, and they're very specific in their kind of their coverage. So, I think it's just a very different, kind of landscape, and how you develop those relationships becomes different. I think that kind of you can guess what that means for the amount of specialized healthcare reporters, right, or reporters working on a specific beat. So while there's less of them, you do get to know them much better and on a deeper level, right, and you form those relationships in a different way. So for me, that was fantastic. I think I cut my teeth on, kind of that traditional media relations, being able to like, build those relationships really quickly. Yeah, so I loved it. I think it was, for me, it was a fantastic kind of intro into the world of PR. I thought I would stay for, a year, maybe 2, ended up with 6. I have a dual nationality now. So, it really has a fond place in my heart.
Fantastic. And you stayed on the course in terms of healthcare and pet health, but then moved all the way to London and with Edelman. And I just wanted to sort of just dig a little bit about what were your impressions of London, and did it match up to what your sort of perceptions were, the reality, what made you decide to choose to move all the way from Australia to London, and just a little bit about that transition to then moving to Edelman, a leading global agency with a global outlook?
Yeah, of course. I think this is a question that you asked earlier around, why health? And I want to say it was a bit of an accident, really. I was coming back to Australia, and it wasn't that I had had previously a real interest in healthcare communications. To be honest, I didn't fully understand what healthcare communications and PR really was. And I was interviewing for different agencies at the time. I really thought I would go into kind of brand or corporate PR. And I took an interview with Palin at the time and had a kind of conversations with the managing director Martin, who is kind of the founder and the owner, and we just got on really well. And so I think we kind of took a collective kind of bet on each other. He was betting on me being kind of green and just out of university, and that I would kind of live up to live up to the hype, I guess. And I was kind of taking a leap into healthcare comms, not knowing a lot about the industry, and I just loved it. I think to your point about purpose driven work, it's inherently purpose driven when you're talking about healthcare issues. So I think that is why I stayed. I loved it. And everything that I've done since, it still always has that really science and data driven base. So, and it really is purpose driven. So, I feel like for me, that's been a real pull, and really fills my cup when I think about, the kind of work that I love to do. And then thinking about the reason I made the leap. So you'd think that I glutton for punishment, trying to move countries multiple times, but after 6 years, while I loved my experience in Australia, you kind of only really get Australia and New Zealand focused work. A lot of the APAC work even goes to Singapore, or at that time it was China, different parts of Asia. It didn't really come to Australia, and so I really wanted to try my hand at more of that global work, or even kind of like regional work. And so it was, for me, in my mind, that was either New York or London. And I ended up choosing London because it was a bit easier visa wise. So yeah, I had a bunch of different interviews with different agencies, and I think in my mind I was already going to be out of my depth making the cross country move. And so I said, why not? I'm going from a small specialized agency in Australia. Why don't I go to a big agency experience? I really wanted to have a lot of different people to learn from, different capabilities within the agency that you don't necessarily get in-house when it's a smaller agency. So yeah, I thought, why not dive in the deep end? And that's really why I chose Edelman, and why I chose London.
Fantastic. And, it's always quite interesting because a lot of people coming into the industry, they often ask about, should I work in a big agency? Should I work in a small agency? Or should I work in-house? And after Edelman, you moved in-house to Mars. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think are the sort of the general pros and cons of small agency, versus big agency versus in-house?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's pros and cons to both, right? I think, and I've loved my experience across all of them. I've loved, small specialized agency, big agency, right? Big global integrated agency, and now in-house. And I think it can be beneficial regardless of what order you do it in, and how you do it. I think it's a bit about kind of understanding what they bring, right? What they offer. So if you're in a big integrated agency, you get kind of access to those different capabilities, right? At Edelman, we had in-house research, kind of data and analytics teams. We had copywriting teams, creative teams, crisis and issues teams, right? So there's always someone in the network that you can kind of pull on to help you with something, who's done that way more times than you have. And so while you might be the client expert, they are kind of the crisis expert, or whatever it is. So I think having that access to that knowledge and those colleagues was fantastic. But I think in a small agency, you do a bit of everything, right? So you get your hands dirty in a lot of different things that you might not in an agency, where there's a bit more structure in terms of levels and specific roles and what you get involved in. It's not to say that you won't, but I think there's different different ways that it all comes to life. And in an in-house role, I think you get a full picture. So agency, you get a slice, right? You get a slice of a lot of different clients and a lot of different campaigns. Even if they're a long-term client, you're still only getting that one kind of view. I think in-house, you get a view of the whole business, right? You're much closer to what's happening, the context, what might be kind of your challenges, what's influencing. And I think there's this misperception that in-house is slower or easier. And I really disagree. I think, you are balancing a lot more long-term deadlines and short-term things that crisscross all the time. And so you might have longer lead times because you're seeing things from start to finish, across the lifespan, not just maybe the external activation, right, of that campaign. But yeah, I think that has very much changed, and maybe that's different depending on what in-house role you have as well. But for me, my in-house experience has definitely been just as exciting so far as my agency time as well.
That's fantastic. And with Mars, you continued your focus on pet care, but you also started to widen your remit in encompassing inclusion and diversity comms. How did you go about taking on that extra area for you to sort of master? And I'd love to know a little bit about how you balance both of those, your sort of pet care specialism and then also the inclusion and diversity comms lead.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the pet stuff has been a long time interest. I think it started when I was in Australia, and we used to joke that I kind of became the chief marketing officer for the agency because, we started with one client. We were working with Guide Dogs Australia, and then it kind of snowballed. We started working with Mars Petcare in Australia and Assistance Dogs Australia, Bowringer Animal Health, and so we kind of built up this pocket of kind of a service offering for pet health companies. And I loved it. I love animals, I love pets. And so and it was always science driven as well, so it kind of fit really nicely in our niche. And then when I moved to London, they had just won the pet care business, so that was obviously an appeal to work on the global science communications for pet care. And so, kind of started working on that alongside the other kind of global public health work that I was doing at the time. And yeah, I think for me it felt like a natural continuation of that in London. And the diversity and inclusion part of things has always been, kind of a focus area for me. I would say a bit unconsciously at first. For me, I love PR as an industry. And so why wouldn't we want it to be as open and inclusive as possible? And then, over time, as we've talked about different topics related to that, which is how do we protect the mental health of our people? How do we look after the well-being of, the kind of people? How do we make sure that we're showing up as our best selves as an industry, right? And so that, incoming students or potential employees can think of this as a career that they want to have. And then, and that has transitioned into a lot of the work that I did at Edelman around gender equity, around our kind of overall inclusion and diversity efforts, which were always, I would say, kind of aside to, the day to day. And so when this was back in December 2021, there was an opportunity, to help Mars Pet Care look at this as part of my day-to-day role as a secondment. I kind of jumped at the opportunity because it was a way to flex that muscle, in a different way, and to really have that as my sole focus all the time. And I loved that, and that's kind of how we've got to today. So a version of what I'm doing now.
And you also are a committee member for Women in PR with a big focus on mentoring. For those who aren't familiar, could you tell us a little bit about Women in PR, what they do, why people should join, and what drew you to the organization?
Yeah, of course. I had known a little bit about women in PR before joining the committee. I knew a couple of the past presidents and people who were involved in the committee, and I really looked up to them. There were some inspiring women who, I already loved and kind of respected. And as an organization, Women in PR is really dedicated to helping women overcome those barriers to leadership. So we know that they're still at leadership levels, at CEO levels, board levels, not enough representation, both from a diversity perspective, gender wise, but also, race and ethnicity, and all of the kind of other facets of DEI. And women in PR is really focused on, how can we help overcome, and that is through, kind of the creation of kind of a community of women who can help uplift, right, empower, help us overcome some of our self-doubt, that lack of self-belief sometimes. We run events and networking. I help obviously run the mentoring program, which I'm really proud of, and this is our 11th year, so it's one of our flagship programs that we run in partnership with PRWeek, and it's really about, how can we give women in our industry that the extra boost that they need to be able to, kind of break that glass ceiling, as you say. And really looking at, how do we advocate for the issues that, women are facing now and previously and in the future.
Do you know, I remember first entering the industry about 15 years ago, and diversity wasn't such um, a hot topic. And then it just started growing in awareness, and there's a lot of noise around it. And now, I sort of read that the number of job adverts for DEI professionals have reduced quite significantly in the last year or two. I just want to know, from your perspective, have you seen a sort of a shift in terms of the value that organizations are placing on DEI, or even the trajectory that DEI has been on the last 15 years?
Yeah, I think people are much more conscious of it as a business priority, right? I think the case for DEI as a kind of a growth strategy is there, right? I think we spent a lot of years trying to convince people that this was not a nice to have, right? That this created stronger teams that had better decision making, that had better business outcomes, that wasn't just, kind of an HR issue or something to be managed on the side or on top of, everything else. I think it really needs to be baked in. I think, you know, it's an interesting external context, really challenging external context for agencies, for businesses. But I think the smart ones realize that this is an integral part of how they get through that, how they build a stronger future focused business. I think there's a lot of change in the needs and expectations of, incoming generations, but basically everyone post COVID, right? We had a whole rework of how we think of where work gets done, how it gets done, the value that we want from it, how we want our employer to show up for us. And, and I think DEI is a huge thread within all of that. And, employers who are going to get this right, or who are getting this right, are the ones who aren't taking their foot off the gas, and are really looking at how they continue to do that, how they double down on their efforts so far. And I think what some people struggle with is that it is a journey, not a destination, right? So it's not something that you can just tick off and say it's done. It's something that is building inclusion, building inclusive teams and cultures are ongoing work, and are only as good as, the effort that you put in on an ongoing basis. So, you know, it's people struggle with that sometimes, but I think the people that are getting it right understand that.
Fantastic. And you're also the chair of Equity Inclusion Advisory Board for the PRCA. And what I wanted to ask is, there's a lot of people that are familiar with these terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. Can you just talk us through what these terms mean and how they relate to each other? Because I remember, again, 15 years ago, it was just diversity that was really talked about, and then all of a sudden inclusion, and then all of a sudden equity. And there are still, it's still, some of us really struggle to understand the parameters between them and how they relate to each other.
Yeah, and I think everyone has a slightly different interpretation of what it means to them. I think for me, when I think about DEI as a whole, right, I'm thinking about how can we have an industry or a business or an agency that is reflective of the diverse society around us, right? That has, is as diverse as the communities that we're trying to serve. Otherwise, we're not able to, think as creatively and serve them as well as we could have. But also, diversity is one piece, which, to me means, do we reflect the, kind of the communities around us? The inclusion piece is, once those people are there, do they feel like what they're saying matters? Do they feel like their voice is being heard and, truly listened to, that they're making an impact and a change? It's not enough to be, as we know, to be in the room. It's like, are people listening to you in the room? Do you have a voice? Do you have not just a seat at the table, but do you have a voice at the table as well? So it is that kind of inclusion and belonging piece, which is where I think, everyone is moving, which is really the most important bit. It's not just about getting the numbers. It's about, are we actually really utilizing that diverse community in the best way possible?
And then you also were the former co-chair for the PRCA, for the PRCA Health Group, and you have focused so much of your sort of time and energy in your career to health and pet health as well. And I wanted to touch upon mental health. Whenever we read all these surveys, it always sort of comes out in the most stressful professions, PR comes pretty high up. And I mean, I have a dog, and I think actually my lovely dog is just is actually what I really have witnessed, this huge transformation in my mental health by having a dog. I just find animals are really healing, and and even the practical elements of I have to go out for a walk and tear myself away from my computer or my calls, or my meeting, or my work, in order to take a walk with him and see the world through his eyes as he sniffs around the pavement and God knows what. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of your lens on the mental health sort of issues that we face in the PR industry, I'd just love to get your perspective, just because you've got such a strong health background and you are so attuned to the industry. And obviously, you've spent, your incredible years in the industry.
Sure, and I love the call out for your pets and your mental health, because I think there is actually a big body of evidence that shows the many kind of physical, mental, social benefits of having a pet. And it's not just the being able to get out and get more steps, right? It's the having a companion there that can help you reduce your stress and all of those kinds of things. So fantastic. I love that. And yeah, I think from a mental health perspective, if you look at the data, we there are signs of progress, which is good. I think it shows that people are more willing to talk about mental health in the workplace, compared to previous years. If you look at the kind of last report that CIPR and PRCA did with Opinium, which I believe is 2023/2024, but as you say, we see that 91% of professionals in our industry have reported poor mental health in the last year. So and that's compared to the general population, which is 63%. So we're way above kind of the average. And some of that, people like to say that comes with the territory, right? Especially if you're agency side, there's lots of deadlines and looming pressures and things like that. But if you look at the data, the thing that is really causing people the most stress is the workload. And so I think there's something that we really need to do to dig into, okay, is it the way that we do resourcing? Is it, the way that we're doing recruitment and retention? And maybe it's bits of all of those things, but there's something, really that we're not getting right when it comes to, workload for people. And that's, you know, the number one thing for them, that they say they can't take time off to deal with their mental health, and and they're not able to kind of recover. So I think that there are signs of progress in terms of being able to kind of overcome some of the stigma around mental health. I think we also saw that the number of people that were diagnosed with a mental health condition have gone up. But I think it's about now matching that with, okay, are employers and organizations set up to, to best support their employees if they have a diagnosis, or if they, need time off? Are the teams set up to be able to cope with if someone leaves, right? I think there's a lot of things that you need to think about. Do you have mental health first aiders as part of your team? Many, many different facets. But yeah, I would say I'm cautiously optimistic about, where we're heading in terms of mental health. I think actually, while the pandemic did a lot of bad, I think for the conversation about mental health, it really put it front and center, and people immediately understood this is something that affects everyone. It's not just something that is, a clinical diagnosis.
That's brilliant, and I agree. I think it's what's been wonderful about the journey of mental health awareness is people are more willing to talk about it, not have that sense of shame, which I think is really important, because I think a lot of people were worried about talking about it and how it will impact their career and people's perceptions of their ability to handle their workload. So I thought, so I think that's been a great plus over the years. Now we have come to the closing section where there's a few questions that I would love to ask you. And the first is, I want to know, who is the communicator that you admire the most?
It's a great question. As I was thinking about this, I'm going to hedge and say a couple because I think there's a lot of communicators that I look up to. I would say I love Jacinda Ardern. I think she, the kind of former Prime Minister of New Zealand, I think she had a really fantastic style and really showed what it was like to be a calm and quiet and compassionate leader, which we don't always see, especially nowadays. I think Barack Obama is fantastic. I know I'm going a bit policy here, but I think I'm not sure if you saw recently, but he did rapped a few bars of an Eminem song in one of his speeches, and I think that's the kind of gravitas and delivery that you just can't necessarily teach, right? That's just the kind of thing that someone has or it doesn't really have, and I think he's fantastic like that. If I think about people that I've worked with, I think Dr. Seth Berkley, who was the previous CEO of Gavi, was just masterful at taking high science topics around vaccines, vaccine delivery, development, and really bringing it down to, what policymakers, what the general public can take in and really understand. And I think he and people like Tony Fauci gave a masterclass in that during the pandemic, right? In doing that day after day after day. And then I love people who use humor as a bit of kind of a comms levity tool, right? So I think people like Trevor Noah or Max Foster for CNN on TikTok. Like I love the way that they take things that are, sometimes quite heavy topics, but add a bit of levity so that you can actually, kind of process them and take them in.
I love watching comedians. I think it's just fascinating how they can have an impact on an audience's emotion, to make them laugh
Yeah.
until the tummy hurts. And so I often watch comedians and I watch their body language, the way they speak, the sort of cadence, because I think as PRs, we've got a lot to learn from comedians. And I think it's fascinating. And the two politicians that you mentioned, Obama and Jacinda, they both had something in common. They both sort of, dropped the whole traditional, this is what a politician looks like and sounds like, and they just brought in a level of authenticity. And I think people are so bored of scripted politicians, I dare say, writing, sort of reading out talking notes by their PRs, and what they're looking for is a little bit of a humanity. And I think that's what both Obama and Jacinda managed to do really well, that they show their human side, and that sort of builds so much trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best communications are human first, right? Human centric communications, because ultimately we're talking to each other on a person to person basis. And the stuff that really resonates is stuff where you're forgetting about, oh, this is my audience as a whole, and who am I actually speaking to, right? And you kind of drop a bit of that facade. Those are the ones that I think really hit you the most.
So we stand on the shoulders of giants, and so many of us are shaped by thinkers of contemporary or of yesteryear or history. I wanted to know what sort of authors, podcast hosts, poets, philosophers have had that sort of impact on you, have shaped your thinking, have inspired you.
Yeah. I love a lot of different influences, but I think there's a couple that come to mind right away. And I think My friends are probably sick of me mentioning these two writers, but I really love a bit of business psychology. So Kim Scott wrote a book called Radical Candor, which I just love, and I think there's so many things that I keep coming back to. I think I read it maybe 3 years ago now, and I still, kind of pull it out and reference some of the things that she brings up in there. I also really love Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He was a kind of former FBI hostage negotiator, which doesn't sound like it would be that applicable to business, or maybe it would, but yeah, quite good at giving examples from his work that then apply to, kind of your day to day and how you can approach, conflict or different conversations with people. So I really love that. I recommend that to people a lot of times. As a science nerd, I really enjoy things like the Huberman Lab podcast. He's, kind of a professor of neurobiology at Stanford. So those ones are quite long, I think. So if you're on a, kind of road trip or car ride or something like your commute, those are quite good. And I loved that you included a poet in that question, because I wasn't ever that into things like spoken word until a few years ago when I was at Edelman at the time, and I interviewed this amazing spoken word poet, Sophia Thacker, who is, yeah, just incredible. And ever since I've kind of been getting into that. And I just find it such an incredible way of capturing the human existence. And I recently went to see a guy called Dan Whitlam at Coco in Camden. He's another kind of spoken word. He blends a bit of spoken word and music, which I think is fantastic. So yeah, I think I take a bit of inspiration from a lot of different places.
I love that. I read the same book on negotiation, and I thought it was really fascinating because there's a perception that PRs, and I know this myself, have a tendency to people please, and so negotiation and conflict becomes really hard. And having and reading sort of about these frameworks, and I did a negotiation course as well, really helped, because actually it is something that a lot of PRs do sort of you know they don't always have the sort of the skills to deal with.
Yeah.
So I definitely benefited from reading his book, and I think he also had like a video of him on masterclass. Um, I watched as well, and I just thought it was absolutely fascinating, the psychology that
Hmm.
goes into negotiation and how much prep work that you have to do. Is not about just the sort of skills that you have during the negotiation. It's understanding at the beginning, before you go into negotiation, what's the minimum you want to walk away with, what's the maximum, anchoring, and and absolutely fascinating. Now,
100%. And I love what he says as well, which is, a bad deal is worse than no deal, right? And I think that's good for us to remember in just generally in life, because I think we're also programmed to want to get to a compromise or a deal. And sometimes you just have to stick to your guns that this isn't a good opportunity, and we need to stay with that.
yeah, and also I think what I loved about what he was saying is to mentally prepare yourself to walk away if you don't get your minimum, and also sort of not delaying tactics, but you don't have to make a decision on the spot, and it's much better for you to walk away, confer with your colleagues, and then come back, because so many times you're in a position and you sort of feel pressurized to say yes to something or make a decision there and then, but actually that's not the right time for you, because your body may be in fight and flight mode. It may impair your cognitive ability to sort of really think about what was discussed during the negotiation. So I think he's absolutely brilliant. And any form of frameworks around negotiation, I think, is really important for us PRs. Now, what career advice would you give to your younger self? Imagine yourself working in your aunt's PR firm, and and sort of doing that, the photocopying back then, or faxes. I don't know what was there, what was available back then. What advice would you like to give that young girl?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, if people ever ask me for advice, and one of them is around being the CEO of your own career. I really believe in proactivity, and it's not necessarily about being the loudest, but I do really think it's important to say what you're interested in out loud, not just to yourself, because I found with my career that a lot of the incredible work or clients that I've been able to work on was because someone knew that I had an interest in that, right? Or I put my hand up first, and said, I would love to work, if we win that, I would love to work on that. And so, I think it's important, managers aren't mind readers and leaders aren't mind readers. So it's important to say where you have an interest and what you'd really love to get involved in, and to, I guess manifest it in a way, but put it out there in the world. I also think maintaining that healthy sense of curiosity, and also always having that your eye on the outside in perspective, because I think it's so easy for us to get stuck in our this is what we do as either my team, my agency, my organization, or even as PRs, this is what we do. I think it's important to kind of continue to seek that external inspiration and creativity, and to help us to stay current and future focused, and stay ahead of the curve. And I also think the last bit would be that you learn by doing. And so I think sometimes we're so focused on getting it perfect or 100%. And I think especially when you're just starting out in your career, just get your hands dirty, right? Like try it out, try it, see if you like it. No job is forever, or it doesn't have to be forever, right? If you don't want it to be. So I think I would really encourage people to try things out, and put their hand up for different opportunities and things, because that's really how you're going to figure it out.
I love that. And, I have a tendency for analysis paralysis. And what I've realized over the years is actually it really makes your energy quite stagnant. And sometimes, instead of the fear of failure, just go, do it, learn, and be okay if you've dropped a few balls. But actually, when you're in this sort of doing phase, it's so energizing. Now, I wanted to ask a little bit about mental health in terms of well-being hacks yourself. I have my lovely dog. What do you have?
Good question. Well, I'm a high I on the disc profiling, if that makes any sense to you, and which means I really get my energy from being around other people. So a lot of my kind of time for me, I think is what you called it, is kind of cooking, hosting, doing something creative, so painting, going to gigs and live music, that type of thing. I used to ice skate competitively when I was younger, so tennis, Pilates, yoga these days. But yeah, a lot of kind of getting out and new experiences, and doing that with other people, because I think that's really where I get my energy. But I love, I'm based in kind of northeast London, so I love going to places like Sadler Wells. They've got some amazing shows there. Obviously, there's free museums and galleries all over London. Yeah, and obviously exploring Europe. That hasn't, for me, I've been here 6.5 years, and it still hasn't lost its appeal. So I do love being able to kind of pop over and explore bits of Europe.
Fantastic. Now, we've come to the end of our conversation, and I just want to say a huge, huge thank you for such a fascinating conversation and for sharing your journey, and especially just the global elements of US, Australia, UK. It's been really enriching. For people who want to reach out to you, how best can they reach out to you?
Sure. I would love for them to reach out. They can find me on LinkedIn. So surprisingly, I think I'm the only Ishtar Schneider, and or they can come say hi in person if they're wanting to come to one of our Women in PR. We have a monthly mixer. We've also got our kind of upcoming end of year celebration on the 26th of November. So would love for people to come say hi. Yeah. So
Fantastic, brilliant. And now I wanted to also thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. And you can find this episode on the PRCA's YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, alongside with other episodes. If you like what you hear, please do share so that we can grow our community. And of course, if you have any feedback or other topics or people that you'd like us to bring in on board, please do let us know. We're always very open, and we publish interviews every 2 weeks. So please do stay tuned. We have some more inspiring storytellers in the pipeline. Thank you.
thank you.